Hello everyone and welcome to Azam Shah Weekly. And in this video, we'll be looking at how we can add transactions to a budget. So right now we can have a budget, which means like a vacation budget or a grocery budget. But when we buy groceries, maybe you're buying cookies and chips, these are the different kind of transactions that we want to add. So the first thing we'll start with is creating our model for the transaction. What do we want to save in a transaction? So I'm just going to go ahead and name this transaction. And it's kind of up to you what you want to save in a transaction, but we will start by importing SwiftData. Create a class, we'll call it transaction, and we will decorate it with the model macro. A transaction can have a note, meaning it's going to tell you what the transaction is all about. Maybe you did a transaction to buy some paper towels or buy some, juice, orange juice or something. So that can be the transaction, the note part. Next, we have the amount of the transaction. So we'll say double. The date of the transaction. Has receipt. So this means that do you have the receipt for the transaction or do you don't have the receipt for the transaction? And a transaction will belong to a budget. So we will also have budget. Now make sure that you keep this as optional. If you don't make it optional, then it is going to fail. So this has to be this kind of a relationship, like a belongs to relationship. It needs to be optional, and maybe it has something to do with when it eventually syncs to CloudKit or something, but it has to be optional. There we go. Now, budget, I'm not going to allow people to just put in the budget over here. We can remove that part. That's not a big deal. Has receipt, well, I'll initialize it to false. So if you don't pass in has receipt, we will initialize it to false. And other things will remain the same. Now, although we have created transaction and we have created the inverse relationship from the transaction to the budget, we haven't done the same from the budget's point of view. So if you go to the budget, now we can say that, well, a budget can have many transactions. So this is a has many relationship. We're just going to go ahead and create transactions, which is simply an array of transactions, and we will initialize it with an empty array. But this is still not really a relationship. It's just a property transaction, which is an array of transactions. So we will create a property over here. We'll decorate it with relationship. And we'll say cascade. So if you look at the relationship over here, relationship is also a macro. And what we're doing is we are setting up a relationship over here between budget and transactions. And relationship, you can pass in many different things over here, but the thing that we're passing is cascade, which means that if you delete the budget, let's say if I have a grocery budget, if I delete the budget, all the different transactions that happen in that budget will be deleted. So the cookies, the chips, the juice, the eggs, everything that I bought, all these transactions, they will be removed also. All right. Great. So here we have the budget model, we have the transaction model. The next thing is obviously to create some sort of a screen that will allow us to add a transaction. So I'm going to go over here and create a new screen. This will be a SwiftUI view. And I'll call this budget detail screen. And the reason I'm calling it a budget detail screen is that from the budget list screen, you are going to navigate to this screen depending on the budget that you select. All right. This means that you need to pass in the budget in order to land on this particular screen. I'll also go ahead and import SwiftData. Now, if I'm passing in the budget over here, and that's like a requirement, then this also means that the preview needs to be passing in something over here. We will not be really needing the preview right now. I mean, we will be needing it, but we will not be working with the previews at this particular moment. So I'm just going to comment this out. We will take a look at how you can make the previews work with when you're working with SwiftData, but that will come in the later videos. All right. So I know, kind of like annoying that you can't really see what's going on, but trust me, we will learn about it a little bit later on. Okay. Now, for now, what we can do, if you want to see the previews, you can kind of like comment this out, because we do want to see the previews at least to build our form or something, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and, for time being, comment this line out so that we don't have to pass in the budget. Next, I'm going to go ahead and create some properties, state properties, which is going to be responsible for gathering information related to a transaction, which includes note, amount, date, and has a receipt, which is true or false. Now, if you want this all to be in a separate structure, that is perfectly fine. I'm just going to use this approach. I have 4 different properties, so I can create 4 different controls to populate them. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and create a form. And inside the form, now I can go ahead and create like a date picker and a toggle and all those kind of things. So there is our text field. I have another text field for the amount. I have a date picker for the date and a toggle for has a receipt, whether it's on or off. And you can see the interface being created in the Xcode preview. It looks pretty good. The next thing we need to do is add a button. And I will say save a transaction. Okay, so when you have saving, or when you want to save a transaction, I'm just going to go ahead and fire over here, save the transaction. There is no function called save transaction, so I'm just going to go ahead and create another function over here, like a private function, because I don't really want this to be called from anywhere outside. It should only be called within the budget details screen. All right. So how do we save a transaction? Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to make sure that we are adding or creating a transaction. So transaction equals to transaction. And we can pass in different things to create the transaction, like note, the amount, which is amount. Now I can go ahead and unwrap it again over here because I do plan to validate it. All right, so that's why I'm unwrapping it forcefully. That's fine. Date, and I believe we can also do has a receipt, which is coming from has a receipt. All right. Now we do still have to validate this. We haven't really done any validation. This means the save transaction button is always visible. So I want to create the same property is form valid, which is Boolean. Now note, I'm just going to say the note is required. So note is empty or white space. So if it's not empty or white space, then the form will be invalid. Other things that are actually required is the amount. So amount should not be equal to nil. You have to enter something. Has a receipt and date, they already have the default values. So they will have some value anyways. All right. And now if you want to do more validation, you can definitely do that in there. Based on the is form valid, I can go ahead and make sure that the button will be enabled or disabled based on the is form valid property. So right now it's disabled, as you can see, because the note and the amount both do not contain a value. At this point, I actually do need the budget, because once we're creating the transaction, we do want to say that this transaction belongs to which budget. So I'm just going to go ahead and for now comment it out. We're going to see later that how you can actually make it work with the previews. But right now I'm just going to not use the previews, and I'll say transaction.budget equals to the budget, which is the one that you actually passed in. So let's uncomment this out right over here. And that particular budget is actually assigned to the budget. That is kind of like setting one side of the relationship, and that is the only thing we want. But from the budget point of view, we can also add this particular relationship by saying budget.transaction.append, and appending the actual transaction. If you don't want to append to the array, that is fine. Sometimes what you want to do is you want to create, or you want to have a little bit more control. So you create these functions inside the budget class. So I can go ahead and create a function called add a transaction. And what happens with these functions and why we are adding these functions is they will give you a little bit more control to add your business logic. Now, I don't really have any business logic, but maybe you can add a business logic right over here. Let's say that if you are in a particular budget and you're adding cookies and cookies like 2 times, so this is something that you can do. You can make sure that those cookies are actually not added. Append the transaction. There we go. So I can go back now. Instead of using this function, I can go ahead and say budget.add a transaction, and I can just add a transaction. I think it's a little bit more easier to read in this case, right? And since the budget is already added to or it's already part of the context, because that's where it is coming from, when you add a transaction to it, it should be saved automatically. But if it's saved, it's not really being displayed. That is something that we'll have to do later on. Now, if we go to the budget list screen, you will find out that there's no way for us to go to a different screen. I mean, if I run this application right now, I may be able to see all the budgets, but they're not really tappable. I can't really tap on a budget and go to a detailed screen and see all the transactions. I can't really do that. Let's go ahead and run this. It's taking some time to run. There we go. So what we're trying to do now is we do have this list over here, and this list contains these H stack, which is indicating that how your budget item will be displayed, and we want those to be links, meaning tappable, so that we can navigate to the budget detail screen. So you can see all of these budgets, but I can't really tap on it. So let's see what we can do. Well, we can go ahead and start using the navigation link, all right? And there are many different overloads. I'm just going to use the one with the value and the label. The value will be the budget, and the label is something that will be displayed on the screen or some sort of a view, which is just going to be the H stack that we have been using. So I'm just going to use that. But this is not really going to do anything at this point. I mean, we haven't really done any navigation destination. So I'm going to go to the form, and at kind of like the very top level, going to add the navigation destination. This is available in, I think, iOS, the latest version of the iOS 16 or something, I guess. And for a particular type, that will be a budget.self destination. We'll have the budget, and we can now go to the budget detail screen, passing in the budget. Great. So at least this is going to allow us to go from one page to the other page. Let's see if that works. All right, so I can see all these different budgets. I can go on a vacation, and yes, it does take me to the vacation budget. It would be nice if it would say vacation over here, so I will have an idea that I'm on this particular budget. So let's go to the budget details screen, and we'll try to say navigation budget.name. So hopefully that is going to display some sort of a title in our page. There we go, vacation, groceries, very good. And next step would be to display your transactions. So I'll go to the budget list screen, and well, actually the budget details screen, right? So all of these, I guess we can call this, you're adding a new transaction. So I can go ahead and say new transaction, kind of similar to when we were adding a new budget. So this is for new transaction. There we go. And we will also go ahead and say all transactions, or just a list of transactions. This is where we can list all the transactions, all right? So I'll say list, we'll use a list, we'll say budget.transactions. And as soon as you say budget.transactions, it is at this point that SQL query will be generated and executed. We'll get the transaction, and the reason that we can do that is because there is a relationship between budget and transactions. So we'll say transaction in, and let's just display the note of the transaction for starting out. All right, that will be our at least good starting point. Let's go ahead and build it. Now currently I don't think that there will be any transactions. So if I go to groceries, you can see I don't really have any transactions. Hopefully I can add a transaction. So let's say that if I want to buy cookies and they cost like $5 or something, save a transaction, cookies is added. Let's go ahead and add something else. Let's say that I want to buy a drink like Coke, and Coke costs, let's say, $10. I can save a transaction. All right. Now, another thing to note over here is if I go ahead and comment out this particular line, what happens then? So let's go ahead and comment out this part, which is basically saying that for the budget, we're adding a transaction. And now let's go ahead and run it again. I'm going to go again to the groceries. I can see my two transactions, which is for cookies and Coke. That's fine. But I'm going to go ahead and add another transaction for eggs. Now, right now you can see that it doesn't really display the eggs anywhere. I mean, it's added because if I go ahead and run the application again, I will actually see eggs being added. So it's there. But since we commented out this line, when we add a new transaction to a budget, this particular list never basically fired again, because according to the actual budget.transactions, you never updated that particular array. So it's very important that you update the array and you update the relationship from both the sides. From the side of the transaction, we are saying transaction.budget equals to budget. So now the budget transaction belongs to a budget. And this part is saying that the budget.add transaction. So this is a has many relationship. So I can kind of like write over here. So this is basically belongs to relationship. This over here. And this part is the has many relationship. I think usually people write it like this, has many relationship. And belongs to. All right. So make sure that you are setting up both sides of the relationship. And when you set up both sides of the relationship, then you know that the integrity of core data models and the database models or database records is there. And this is also going to help you to sync the data to the cloud, because now it has that can't even pronounce it. It has integrity, and all these relationships are set up correctly. All right. So there you have it. Let's go ahead and run it again. Let's go to vacation. Well, you're going to get the rental. Let's say the rental costs $300. Save. That's fine. You can mark this with something else now, like airfare or something. Airfare. And airfare may cost like $1,000 or $500. Have the receipt. Sure. Save a transaction and all that stuff. You can also show the actual dollar amount of these transactions. Each transaction has some sort of a dollar amount. So I can go over here and I can format this. So each transaction has some sort of an amount, and the format style can be currency code USD. So again, I'm using a USD over here. You should probably use locale.currentlocale.currency.identifier, or by default you can use USD. And all of this can be placed in some sort of an extension on the locale.current. All right. We can add also a spacer over here. There we go. And if you go to vacation, here we go, $500, $300, great. If I go to groceries, I can see all the amounts also. Pretty cool, right? So you can see that with very less amount of code, we were able to create this app. I mean, we still have few more lectures that we can do, like we can display the total amount, we can allow the people to delete the transaction, maybe even eventually create some sort of a graph and show some sort of a graph to the user showing different slices of, well, in this budget, you spend like, this much, this large slice of a pie graph, you spend this much on, flights versus this much on food and all that stuff. So all of that stuff we can definitely check out later on. But hopefully you have enjoyed this particular video, and thank you very much, and make sure to subscribe. Hey, if you like this video and want to support my channel, then check out my brand new course, SwiftData Declarative Data Persistence for SwiftUI. This is the only course available on Udemy about SwiftData. Currently, the course is few hours, but I keep on adding new material as I learn it. You can see I have a section on Swift state management updates, getting started with SwiftData, one-to-many relationships, many-to-many relationship, as well as understanding queries. So it has a lot of content that you can definitely watch. Check out the YouTube description for the link to the coupon, and please use that coupon. Thank you so much. Hope you enjoyed the video.